And thank you everyone for taking the time. This is our third First Movers webinar series. So kind of just to set the stage of what to expect in this. So Tarana Wireless is here, and Gabriel will talk about three main things. So we'll talk about, for Pennsylvania and for Washington, state funding profiles. What are the timelines? What are the expectations? How are these scoring systems working? And then what are some of the eligible technologies, in particular fixed wireless access? He'll talk a little bit about the pre-application process, where that is coming down in relationship to the timeline, and then what are some of the key components associated to that. And then lastly, they'll talk about their live tech demos. So Tarana has been going across the country, meeting with NTIA members, meeting with state and local advocates, talking about fixed wireless access, CBRS, and how that looks for last mile, how that looks for high cost areas, for customers trying to put together these complete solutions. And then for my section, we'll talk about our BEAD strategy, what that looks like from a product perspective, what that looks like from a services perspective. There is an example I'll walk through with our QGIS networking tool. We'll showcase the various layers of how we can help you from a network design perspective. And then we've got enhanced programs like high-level fiber designs, grant writing services, professional engineering services, and we finalize by pulling that in with our financial piece of the house. Gabriel, can you go through and walk us through what Pennsylvania and Washington have store for us?
Yeah, absolutely, Alex. And good morning or good afternoon, folks. My name is Gabriel Moran. I'm Government Affairs and Policy Manager at Tarana Wireless. Before we really dig into Washington and Pennsylvania, which are the states that we're really going to focus on today, I kind of just want to give a brief process update as to where the NTIA and the 56 U.S. states, territories, and Washington, D.C. are at in the BEAD process. Obviously we've kind of been playing a game of hurry up and wait for this BEAD process to really get underway. But today, middle of summer, I can really credibly say that the BEAD process is truly underway in earnest. And as of speaking to you this afternoon, 18 states and territories have received NTIA approval of their BEAD initial proposal volume 2, which means those states have 365 days to run their BEAD subgrantee selection and finalization process. So a year is not a lot of time. State broadband offices are painfully aware of that, and they do not want to lose any time unnecessarily. And so they are looking to begin this process as quickly as possible. So today we're going to be really looking at the state of Washington and Pennsylvania. And Alex, if you don't mind, could you go back to that previous slide there? Perfect, thank you. Why are we talking about Washington and Pennsylvania? Well, first, Washington and Pennsylvania are, in the top echelon of states that received very large BEAD allocations as part of the program. Both are billion-dollar states. Washington received $1.2 billion, while Pennsylvania received $1.16 billion. And part of the reason why they received such a handsome sum of money from the federal government to administer their BEAD program is because these are very difficult, challenging states to build broadband infrastructure. Both have very challenging topography and geography. Washington and Pennsylvania both known for lots of heavily forested areas, a good number of mountains or hilly terrain, which is challenging for the deployment of certain types of broadband infrastructure, as well as having large swaths of the state that are rural communities with low population densities that aren't necessarily conducive to the deployment of fiber optic infrastructure. And as a result, both Washington and Pennsylvania have expressed through their initial proposals, which they have now had approved by the NTIA, and through conversations with stakeholders like Tarana Wireless, have indicated that they know that non-fiber broadband technologies will have to be part of the solution in order to achieve the BEAD program's goal of 100% universal service for all unserved and underserved BSLs in the state, broadband serviceable locations. In particular, another dynamic that I want to highlight is, Washington is, like several other states, will allow providers to submit project bids that utilize, multiple technologies, fiber and licensed fixed wireless or HFC cable. And we think that this phenomenon is really interesting because it's an important recognition of the fact that, for a given set of broadband serviceable locations in a project area, it may make sense to deploy fiber to serve those folks. But a small cluster of BSLs that are particularly hard to serve and potentially more expensive to serve with fiber infrastructure may need to be served with something else in order to balance the dual mandate of conserving each state's finite BEAD allocation while also ensuring that those homes or businesses receive the reliable, high-speed, low latency broadband service that they deserve. So this hybrid technology bid is really interesting. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And finally, these are just very strong states with very well put together initial proposal volume twos with certain key lessons that other states have incorporated into their initial proposal volume twos. Next slide. Excellent. So, Washington and Pennsylvania both received their NTIA approval of their Volume 2 initial proposal in May. Pennsylvania received theirs on May 6th of this year. Washington received theirs on May 9th. And as I mentioned earlier, these states will have 1 year, 365 days to complete their BEAD process. So Washington will need to submit a final proposal to the NTIA for approval on May 9th of 2025. So Pennsylvania will need to submit theirs on May 6th of 2025. Essentially with the results of their BEAD subgrantee selection process, credibly certifying that they have met the federal government's goal of 100% universal service. Pennsylvania has completed its challenge process as of May 23rd. So they've already finished the process. They know what final broadband serviceable locations will be eligible for BEAD funded infrastructure. Washington, they're still in the final determination phase of their challenge process. So they're currently reviewing the challenge submissions and rebuttals and making their final decisions about which BSLs will be eligible for BEAD funded infrastructure. A key thing that I want to point out here, and we'll dig into this a little bit more with Pennsylvania in the following slides, is Pennsylvania has a pre-application process which they expect providers to participate in order to be eligible to be part of the BEAD application process in Pennsylvania. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means, but for the folks who are on this call, it's important to be aware of what the pre-application process is and the potential impacts it has on your organization's ability to participate in the BEAD program. Washington does not have a pre-application process, as noted on the slide here. Below the final items that I have here for both Washington State and Pennsylvania is just a general sense as to how the sequencing or timing of how these states plan to run their BEAD subgrantee selection process. As you can see, both states will be running multiple rounds of BEAD applications and submissions, and that is, I think, in part an effort to ensure that both states are as comprehensive as possible in ensuring every single BSL is accounted for in a BEAD, a successful BEAD project application that is chosen for award during the subgrantee selection process. Neither state has put out a formal start date for when the selection process will begin. Pennsylvania believes that they will start their process in October or November. Washington is looking towards the early fall to start their BEAD subgrantee application process. However, they have said that they may start the process earlier depending on the timing of the NTIA approval of their challenge process results. Next slide. Excellent. So the BEAD pre-application process. The pre-application process has a couple of different names. It's referred to sometimes as the pre-application process, the pre-qualification process, or the pre-registration process. But essentially, generally, this pre-application process is a specific phase of the BEAD application program where providers, ISPs, who are looking to submit a project bid as part of their state's BEAD program, are required to submit certain documentation and information to the state broadband office to demonstrate their ability or capability or eligibility to be successful in a 4-year reimbursement-based federal program. We'll talk a little bit more about what that documentation looks like. But part of the pre-application process, the function of the pre-application process is to allow state broadband offices to front load a lot of the administrative paperwork in terms of processing and figuring out of the thousands of internet service providers operating in our state today, who actually, has the ability, the infrastructure, the financial wherewithal, the technical sophistication to participate in this program and be a good steward of taxpayer funds allocated through the BEAD program. For that reason, Tarana Wireless really strongly encourages that you begin the process of putting together your BEAD pre-application materials today. This is not something that you can do during a weekend. This is something that will take weeks, if not months, to put together. So, there's no time like the present to really get started on putting together your pre-application materials. Next slide. Excellent, thank you. So with Pennsylvania, part of the reason why we selected Pennsylvania, in addition to the fact that it's a $1 billion state, it has a lot of challenges that it will need to overcome as it looks to select winning BEAD projects, is there's a real explicit recognition of the fact that fiber is just not going to get the job done in Pennsylvania. There is a real understanding of the fact that there are parts of Pennsylvania, particularly central Pennsylvania, where it just doesn't make sense to deploy fiber infrastructure. As a result, Pennsylvania has been really explicit in calling for providers to bid next generation technologies and networks as part of the BEAD program to ensure that a lot of those hard to reach, low density, most expensive rural areas get the broadband service that they need, and not at the cost of ensuring every unserved and underserved household in Pennsylvania gets broadband service through the BEAD program. They've been really explicit in naming about what technologies they will consider as part of that consideration or that desire to deploy these next generation networks. And interestingly, and we will see how this plays out once the bidding takes place, Pennsylvania does reserve the right in part, and actually, if you wouldn't mind moving to the next slide here. Pennsylvania does reserve the right to deploy its own wireless infrastructure to ensure that every single BSL in the state gets the broadband service that it needs and deserves. It's interesting, there's only one other state I'm aware of that made a similar suggestion, the state of Ohio, which said that the state of Ohio may come in, build its own broadband infrastructure, and then lease it back to an ISP for operation. Ohio has yet to have its initial proposal volume 2 approved. Pennsylvania, as I've already noted, has already had its initial proposal volume 2 approved. But it's interesting to see that the state is ready and willing to step in and deploy non-fiber technology to get that 100% universal service as part of the BEAD program. It'll be very interesting to see how this plays out, but I think it's something that's important to flag for the audience here today as to the recognition of the need to deploy next generation technologies that are not fiber to meet the BEAD goal of 100% universal service. Next slide. Excellent. So going back to the pre-application process, Pennsylvania does have a fairly rigorous pre-application process that it expects providers to participate in successfully in order to move on to submitting a true final application as part of the BEAD program. The pre-application process for Pennsylvania is expected to take at least 90 days. As part of the submitted materials that the State Broadband Office wants to have providers submit, they will expect providers to have audited financial information for 3 years prior to the BEAD application. They also will want providers to submit a tentative project application as part of the pre-application. So they want to have providers indicate which BSLs they plan to serve, as well as potentially indicating the cost to serve each of those BSLs, the type of technology that the provider intends to deploy, the proposed speeds, the monthly subscription cost to the end user, the cost per passing, the total cost of the project, the financial matching capability of the provider, as well as a commitment letter from the provider certifying that they will offer the match that they have stated they will offer for the project. Once this information has been submitted and the broadband office has taken the time to review, vet, and thoroughly interrogate the submitted items as part of the pre-application process, eligible providers or applicants will be invited to proceed to the next phase to submit a final application. Next slide. The scoring process for the for Pennsylvania's BEAD program is going to be fairly thorough, and there are a couple of interesting things I think to really note, within this scoring rubric that you see here. So, the minimal BEAD program outlay is the largest scoring category for the state of Pennsylvania. And that is actually composed of 3 subcategories that are going to be scored separately by the Pennsylvania Broadband Development Authority. First, within that 35-point category, 25 points of those 35 points will be awarded based on the provider's ability to offer the lowest cost per BSL, so the lowest cost to serve each BSL within their project. So a lot of points will be awarded based on that pure metric. The second subcategory, for a total of 10 points within that first category, is the scalability of technology. And that is offered on a range of, 1 point will be awarded for a provider who is able to meet the 100 by 20 megabit per second threshold set by the NTIA for the BEAD program. And a full 10 points will be awarded for providers who can offer gigabit symmetrical service to end users. There is a formal table that you can get from the State Broadband Office with the actual scales, the speed or performance scales that you can take a look at. And then finally, within that first category, the final subcategory is the match scoring component. And that essentially, the broadband office will offer up to 5 points for your ability to exceed the 25% private sector match requirement as part of the BEAD program. A provider who is able to offer less than 50% match will get 1 point. a provider who can offer between 50 to 75% of a project's total cost will get 2.5 points. And any provider who can offer a match of greater than 75% will get the full 5 points. For the affordability component, the broadband office wants providers to offer at least a 100 by 20 megabit per second plan at the indexed consumer price index benchmark for the state of Pennsylvania. So you will have to reference the application materials for the volume 2, which actually specifically states what the low cost plan will be for a given project area. The next category for fair labor practices is essentially a demonstrated track record or a signed commitment of a provider to abide by state or federal labor laws. The speed to deployment section for 1 point, essentially, a provider who is able to complete their broadband build out in under 4 years will receive that point. The speed of network and other technical capabilities component essentially will examine and weigh the speeds, latency, and other technical capabilities of the proposed network. A provider that's able to demonstrate that they're able to easily scale their network with lower future investment and with the funded infrastructure having a longer lifespan will receive a full 5 points in this category. For the equitable workforce development and job quality component, providers are going to be expected to develop and provide a job plan that encapsulates how a provider is going to meet state goals on achieving a diverse workforce. How the provider plans to how the provider plans to retain and hire local workers for the program. Ensuring that underrepresented populations are employed as part of the program, as well as the ability of the provider to offer wraparound services like childcare, transportation, or other reasonable accommodations. So fairly comprehensive requirement. And then the local government coordination component essentially is trying to incentivize providers to meet with representatives of municipalities where BEAD projects are going to be built out. And so the Pennsylvania Broadband Office wants evidence that ISPs are meeting with city council members, meeting with mayors, meeting with other elected representatives of these municipalities to talk through the projects that they plan to build out in the area. Local support is going to be really key in ensuring that these projects are successful in the long term. And then finally, for the open access category, for a whopping 5 points, the Broadband Development Authority will award points for providers that are building out a wholesale last mile broadband service that is open access for all potential retail providers who want to use their service. Next slide. Perfect. So moving on to the great state of Washington. As I noted earlier, Washington does not have a pre-application process, so yay. That means that there will be a little less paperwork on your end, in the near term to submit to the Washington State Broadband Office. So first, 40 points will be awarded as part of the minimal BEAD program outlay component of the scoring criteria. And essentially, the Washington Broadband Office plans to take all the applications for a given project area and score them against each other. And per the initial proposal, Volume 2, the state of Washington plans to award the application or project requesting the least amount of BEAD funding will get the full 40 points for this category. For the affordability component, the Broadband Office will award up to 20 points for a provider that is able to offer that 100 by 20 megabit per second service at a cost of less than $40 per month, and will offer 10 points if the price is between $40 and $49.99. So, there's a pretty clear kind of breakup of how these points will be allocated in the affordability component. For the fair labor practices element, for a total of 15 points, there are going to be two elements that are really that will be evaluated as part of this. First, applicants that have already been operating as an ISP and have a track record and evidence of complying with federal labor and applicable state employment laws will be required to submit a narrative and evidence of that past track record of compliance and ability to stay on the right side of the law. For folks who are new to operating as an ISP or operating under federal compliance, applicants that are new market entrants essentially will be required to submit an attestation of future compliance with the relevant labor practices and labor laws. And there's specific documentation enumerated in the initial proposal volume 2 that providers should be mindful of who have not had past experience with federal labor law compliance. For the speed of deployment criteria, which is a whopping 1 point, the broadband office will award the single point to projects that essentially demonstrate that the provider can complete a project before 3 years from the day of award. So for the BEAD program overall, providers are expected to complete their BEAD obligations in under 4 years, or by 4 years. Washington State Broadband Office will offer 1 point if a provider can finish that in less than 3 years. For the open access category, similar to Pennsylvania, Washington will offer more points to providers who are going to be deploying a service that will be free and fair and open to other retail broadband providers to use in providing last mile broadband service. For the local and tribal coordination, similarly, the Washington State Broadband Office wants providers to demonstrate collaboration and or communication with local government entities and tribal authorities about the planned infrastructure that they want to make under the BEAD program. So letters of support from county commissioners, city councils, mayor's offices, tribal governments, or community members are kind of the principal form of evidence that the Washington State Broadband Office is looking for here. For the adoption and digital navigation component, essentially providers are being asked to essentially develop a plan for how they can offer digital navigator services. So essentially, technology skills and device distribution to communities to ensure they have full access and capability to use and up the broadband infrastructure that's being funded by BEAD, and therefore, ensuring that this is a good investment that will uplift the communities that have been on the wrong side of the digital divide. Finally, for speed of network, Washington offers up to 3 points to folks for deploying non-fiber technologies. All 3 points will be awarded to folks who are deploying hybrid fiber coaxial cable. 2 points will be awarded to providers who are bidding fixed wireless using licensed spectrum or CBRS. And then folks who are bidding low Earth orbit satellite will receive 1 point and will really be restricted to extremely high cost areas for deployment of satellite service. Next slide. Awesome, thank you. So, as I alluded to at the front here, at the front of the presentation here, Washington State, like many other states in their initial proposal volume 2s, are explicitly allowing providers to submit project bids that utilize a mixture of broadband technologies. And in part, this is just recognizing the fact that, fiber is not the end-all be-all solution to providing broadband service, particularly in a lot of these areas that are very topographically challenging or have low population densities. And in those scenarios, it may make sense to use another reliable broadband technology to offer broadband service through the BEAD program. And Washington has set a pretty clear kind of criteria as to how they will permit technologies or applications with multiple technologies. And the two key criteria are the ability of the alternate technology bids to satisfy the speed of service requirements. So that is the 100 by 20 megabit per second threshold that we discussed earlier. And important to note as well is ensuring that the latency is less than 100 milliseconds. The second component is the ability of the application, or this alternate technology application, to achieve a lower cost per location within the applied project areas. So again, think about where the economics to deploy a fiber network make sense and where they don't make sense, and being able to give providers a little bit more flexibility and versatility in selecting which technologies are used in their network ensures that providers can shoot for that lower cost cost of service per BSL and save the state of Washington money to deploy broadband infrastructure elsewhere. And the key thing to also note here is that Washington has said that for these project bids that utilize multiple technologies, the speed of network scores will be based on the slowest broadband speed, which is why I would really strongly recommend for folks who are considering either bidding purely a non-fiber project bid as part of the BEAD program or a hybrid project bid, your alternate technology that you go with should have the ability to not just meet but greatly exceed the 100 by 20 megabit per second threshold set by the NTIA. This also really helps to demonstrate the scalability and future-proof aspects of this non-fiber technology in your application. Next slide. Excellent. So, as I've said, we're working with hundreds of providers right now on their BEAD applications, and a lot of folks are going to be bidding a mixture of fiber and next generation fixed wireless. And what the points that I have here are really, kind of some high level thoughts as to how you should think about incorporating Tarana Wireless's next generation fixed wireless as part of your BEAD strategy. So, Washington has been really explicit about the scoring of hybrid technology bids. And Washington is not alone. Many other states have also explicitly said they will allow providers to submit hybrid technology bids. If you're a wireless internet service provider who doesn't have any fiber in your network or doesn't have any experience, for those states, this creates a real opportunity for you to partner with a local fiber company to submit a hybrid technology bid. Having those types of partnerships to run two different aspects of the network, I think will be really beneficial and create more opportunity for folks to be successful in these BEAD programs. For states with multiple rounds of bidding, we really are encouraging alternate technology providers to bid all unbid project areas or clusters of BSLs. So, both Washington and Pennsylvania will have 2 rounds of bidding. We think that alternate technology providers should bid far and wide in all of these states so they can provide some valuable kind of points and counterpoints for broadband offices as they kind of assess where providers, the market pricing for providers to offer service in a given area using a certain type of technology. Kind of having some of that real-time market pricing will help these broadband offices make better decisions and lead to them being more likely to be much stricter in abiding by the high cost per location thresholds that they will set as part of the BEAD program. As I mentioned earlier, as you're designing project bids with non-fiber technologies, I strongly encourage you to ensure that 100 by 20 megabits per second is truly the bottom floor of the service offerings of what you plan to offer customers as part of the BEAD program. Your ability to exceed that speed threshold, I think, is going to be really important in distinguishing you from other non-fiber technology bids who may bid, some type of, quote unquote reliable broadband service that can barely eke out the 100 by 20 megabit per second threshold. Your ability to blow that speed standard out of the water will lead to you being much more successful, in our opinion. And as part of maxing out that that speed or service threshold, this will, I think, allow providers to gain some good points on the speed of network and other technical capabilities, scoring segments that offer valuable points, particularly for non-fiber applications that are going to be considered to achieve that goal of universal service. Next slide. Great. So this map that you see here, really demonstrates the amount of outreach that Tarana Wireless has done in the past year and a half or so. We've had our eyes pretty firmly placed on the BEAD program for a while. We have really been super aggressive in trying to meet with state broadband officers, meet with NTIA officials, meet with staff from the federal legislature, both the House and the Congress, both the Congress and the Senate, to show them how fixed wireless technology has really advanced, in the past decade or so. As of talking to you folks today, we have done 48 live technology demonstrations in 24 states. My government affairs colleague at Tarana, Carl Guardino, is currently on a plane flying to Maine for a ribbon cutting and live technology demonstration with the Maine broadband office director of our technology. But so far we have taken 22 state broadband officers out into the field to meet with one of our ISP partners, learn more about the technology, meet with a customer of the ISP who's satisfied with the broadband service they're getting, and is really opening their eyes to the fact that technology has advanced and can have those conversations about strategically how they plan to meet the BEAD Notice of Funding Opportunity goal of 100% universal service. Next slide. Both Pennsylvania and Washington, we have really great constructive relationships across the board. On your screen to the left, there is a photo of some of our Tarana personnel. My colleague Carl is there on the far left. In the middle is one of our ISP customers who is holding a Tarana base node. That's Dwayne Zimmerman, the CEO and co-founder of Crow's Nest Broadband, based out of Altoona, Pennsylvania. To Dwayne's right, the gentleman wearing the suit jacket, that is Congressman John Joyce, who is a member of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, which oversees telecommunications. Congressman Joyce is also a member of the Rural Broadband Caucus. And to the right of Congressman Joyce are the Pennsylvania Broadband Development Authority directors, Director Brandon Carson and Deputy Director Brandon Peters. They've actually been out to 2 technology demonstrations in Pennsylvania, but Congressman Joyce really wanted to get out in the field to see the technology, and we extended an invitation to the 2 Brandons from the broadband office, and they enthusiastically agreed to come out and answer the congressman's questions, which was fantastic. To the right, that is a great photo from one of our live technology demonstrations in, I believe, March of this last year in Washington State with Congresswoman Kathy McMorris Rogers, who is the chair of the House Energy and Commerce Committee. She was in district. We were very lucky to have a deployment with an ISP serving her constituents. So it was a great opportunity for her to come back to the district, learn more about the ISP that is providing broadband service to her constituents, as well as meet with a few constituents who raved about their broadband service. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Alex and the folks at Winncom.
Thank you, Gabriel. That was extremely informative. And please, I would say that the takeaway here is that provides a fantastic overview of timelines, scoring systems. But what we highly recommend is to set up a call, and the information to do so is at the last part of this with one of us on a one-on-one basis, and we can sit down and understand what your offensive strategy looks like, what your defensive strategy looks like, and how we can collectively help you achieve these goals. So from a Winncom perspective, our strategy is twofold. I use a coin analogy a lot when I'm doing these. The first part of the coin is product. So Winncom's a value-added distributor. We've been doing this for over very close to being 30 years. Within our portfolio of products, there's 100 plus manufacturers, and they're really derived to be eco centers, complements. That way, as we're putting together these complex solutions, we have access to the last mile. And Tarana and CBRS is a fantastic example of that. We support the middle mile products, the infrastructure, the routing, the networking that corresponds to it. Again, that complete picture. The BEAD strategy, very similar, but it's taking those pieces and components and figuring out which one of them are falling in one of two buckets, either BABA certification, and those are required for active fiber, passive fiber, fiber adjacent accessories that have to be built in the United States, 55% of the components coming from here. And then there was a waiver that was allocated about 4 or 5 months ago for electronics. In particular, that covers the broadband fixed wireless access, middle mile type of products. So again, we've been able to identify what vendors and what eco centers are supported. The other side of that coin is enhanced services. So I'll talk a little bit about our value add planning services, and then we have some ad hoc services like mapping capabilities, financial capabilities, grant writing services, professional engineering services. And we tie this all together with the attempt to be simple. BEAD's very complicated, information's in multiple different places. To be able to submit a pre-application, you need to have a network design, you have to have a completed grant. So to do this, our goal is to pull all this information into one area, turnkey that experience for you, work with industry-leading partners like Tarana, and give you a single point of contact through your sales account manager that helps you manage this through the identification to planning to application. So for network design and planning, we have a proprietary QGIS mapping database. So I'll use an example. This is Comanche County in Oklahoma. The goal here was to be able to come up with a target area. So think of this as a neighborhood type of view. Before you get into details of cost quest and individual houses, what does my networking strategy look like? So the yellow hexagons represent unserved or underserved areas. Each one of those hexagons is approximately 0.02 square miles. However, we can see at that high level how many locations, how many units, and in particular, how many units are BEAD eligible. And again, that's less than 100 megabits per second. A good analogy here is think of it as an onion, and as we kind of move through these slides, we're taking off layers. And at the end of this, we can compare each one of those layers to be able to ascertain what is our best design? How do we put together and where do we target? So what you're seeing here is a list of existing technology. So fiber is denoted as red, cable is orange, blue is DSL, and green's fixed wireless access, in particular CBRS, and that could be a GAA product or it could have a PAL license. And we're able to look at what that looks like as a capacity perspective. So what's there that's less than 100 megs? What's there that's less than 20 megabits per second? So we're then able, for the next layer, to look at UCLA information. Now this is average per territory, but you can see upload and download speeds. So it's giving us that targeted area of where do we want to target, what's there existing, and what types of services can we offer. Then we look at what needs to be excluded. So from an exclusion perspective, you can't apply for areas that have previous funding vehicles. So in this particular example, they had a couple things going on. They had at the bottom section some CAF2 funding, they had some RDOF funding, some RUS, e-connectivity programs, and some ECAMs. But as you can see, you're starting to funnel into what our target area looks like. Taking those layers and combining them, we can create a Google Earth KML export. Now, there's a lot going on in this slide. Just to kind of break it down a little bit, the red areas were the same as the yellow previously. So those are your hexagons that are 0.02 square miles of your unserved, underserved areas. We then can layer in your asset locations. You've got existing towers, if you have infrastructure, right-of-ways, access to buildings, access to water towers. So we can layer this into that, along with what are the community anchor locations in that corresponding area. Again, from a planning perspective, I now have an idea of where we want to target, what assets are there, and then what are some of the community anchor installations. Now, from there, it gives us the ability to have an in-depth conversation, but the next step is how do we put together designs that you can take and you can use for your grant writing applications. And to do that, I'll talk a little bit about our high-level fiber design capability, in particular, how we can leverage that tool to identify high-cost areas that were in PA and Washington are ranked higher for having hybrid solutions, right? Keeping it as cost-effective as possible. How we tie that into grant writing, how we then can offer low-level designs once you have that application from our professional engineering services, and how we have a suite of financial services to simplify this. So again, going back to our Comanche example, this was very similar to that Google Earth file, where you had your downtown Lawton area was here, you had your north section, east and west would be your community anchor locations, and then there were some community anchor locations, I believe there was like 2 or 3 casinos in this particular example over here. Now, what this tool does, and it does several things that are very interesting. One, it has an AI-generated tool that will develop the fiber spine, and it will do that based on the latest CostQuest household data. It also allows you to see areas that are served to be able to come up with your 10-year plan. In addition to that, there's a win-loss analysis, there's competitive ratio analysis, there's demographic, soil terrain complexity. So I'll kind of walk through that in this slide here, but it allows you to identify clusters of areas. Each cluster or project area can then be ranked. So you'll see on the left-hand side, there's a scoring system associated to it. With this, you'll be able to look at common business attributes. So percentage mix of fiber versus wireless. If it's fiber, are you doing burial or are you doing aerial, and what the percentage? What your average installation cost could be. Depending on the state, it could be anywhere between 16 and 25,000 for aerial, as an example. What your take rate for new subscribers are. What's your match percentage? And we'll talk more about match percentage in our upcoming grant writing session. But just take from here, 25% is the request. That could be less than high cost areas. And there is a thing called in kind, which will allow you to not necessarily have to use money to do it, but you could do it with services, administrative costs, and things of that nature. So pulling from CostQuest, you can see exactly where those households are, if they're served or unserved, and it gives you an AI-generated ability to develop a fiber spine. And with this, it's very interoperable. So based on subscribers that are in high-cost areas, we can do a quick analysis of what that yield is, fiber versus wireless. But as Gabriel mentioned a couple of times, we're being graded and being ranked on our ability to offer the most competitively priced solutions leveraging best of breed technologies. So this tool gives us that ability to really analyze. In addition to that, you have the ability to pull out a 10-year pro forma. So what is the total cost of this project? Fiber wireless installation services. What's your subscriber revenue? What's your win probability? And there's several ways that we can kind of manipulate that to figure out what's the best match or what's some of the best technologies. What's your expected rate of return? What's the revenue at a standard subscriber rate, at a premium, your cost of goods sold, your gross profit, your expenses, your net income. So again, we can help fill in the gaps of what we're going to need to submit for that application. And then there's a whole bunch of hosting of support analysis where we can look at revenue per year, win probability, fiber distance, remote indexes, train indexes, and we're able to do this by pulling the latest cost quest information, by leveraging GIS data that's pulling population density, terrain, network capacity. We're able to look at cost associated to fiber and wireless. And then that special sauce is that AI analytics that optimize the fiber spine that will allow us to put together those hybrid solutions. Bringing this full circle, we also offer grant writing capabilities. So we can work with your engineers if you have a high level fiber design, or as I mentioned previously, you could leverage our capabilities to design this. But we can pull things like project budget. We can list everything for implementation. We can verify all the documents, and then we can even submit the application on your behalf. In addition to that, there's a post-award compliancy service. So to make sure money doesn't get clawed back, we have compliance consulting, we have performance reporting, a process around invoice reimbursements, and closeout reporting. So again, the goal here is to simplify a complicated experience and to offer you a turnkey. What you see here is an example of our grant writing checklist. We took Louisiana, who was the first to have their volume 2 and the first to have an ISP questionnaire. It was around 6 pages. It was complete, but it was hard to follow. So what we created was a simplified, more linear document that helps address step by step what's required. So first you need financials. So getting an audited financials from the last 3 years, your business plans, your pro formas, your analysis of cash flow, your 3-year operation costs. We then look at the project scopes. We look at the service areas, the business and operational plans, and we can help you fill out this application, pull that information. And again, if you want to use our service, we have that ability to do everything and even submit on your behalf. And again, that submission would have an executive summary. It would help with the project narrative, the budget narrative. We'll detail that budget spreadsheet for you. We'll leverage the government forms. We'll look at maps. We'll compile data. And again, we'll submit that application on your behalf. One of the things I'd like to stress is timing is absolutely of the essence. What I mean by that is as Pennsylvania moves to pre-application, the network design part will take a bit of time putting all this together, but grant writing could take anywhere between 6 to 8 weeks. Now you could run this in parallel. We have a lot of customers that are doing both at the same time, but again, it could be 6 to 8 weeks, and the variable here is how much information has to be collected. So please allocate enough time as you're about to submit your applications so we've got the ability to help with the grant writing, or if you're doing it yourself, you should expect the same process. And then we offer professional engineering services. So this could be on-site support, this could be PE stamp drawings, but we've partnered with a company that allows us to put boots on the ground in all 50 states. I don't foresee this necessarily on the high level designs, but once you get the grant application awarded to you, you'll need a low level design, a component level design. And this essentially gives us a force multiplier. Over 115 design engineers, 50 plus poll techs, 75 project managers, OSP engineers. But we can leverage this service to get that low level design, to create a civil 3D drawings or AutoCADs or GIS formats. And then again, we have the ability to do PE stamp drawings, which is necessary for each one of these applications. And we've made this as simple as 3 SKUs. And the variable here is how many pages. We can either validate something you've done or we can do it from scratch. And we tie this all together with our partner Leaf. A lot of the enhanced programs have costs to it. So to lessen the burden of CapEx, especially the initial hit of it, we're able to take those costs over a 3-year period. So for the advanced mapping, for the grant writing services or professional engineering, it gives you a lever, so to speak, to be able to manipulate cash flow. That 25% match can also be manipulated. In kind is one example, prepayment is another. So from a prepayment perspective with Leaf, you could carry that payment over a 5-year period, which could give you the right mix in regards to that grant. And that could be the difference of going at 25% or going in at 30%. It's easier to do that when you have things that count for either in kind or for pre-purchase. And then my last slide is, again, this comes down to that turnkey. We have a dedicated portal and it has a ton of information. The one thing I noticed right off the bat with BEAD is information. It's all over God's creation. So we've taken that and we've put that into one area where you can look at each state. How much is the funding? What the timelines are. Your volume 1s, your volume 2s, your 5-year plans are there. They can be downloaded very simply. There's hyperlinks to the websites if they haven't started the challenge process. We have the process there. We have the hyperlink. If you're in the rebuttal process, reunification process, again, it gives you the ability to look by state and pull out that information. You can see what suppliers are eligible, what services we offer from an enhancement perspective. And then each one of these webinars are also on here as well. So if you missed one, for example, for Nevada and Louisiana, and you wanted to understand their scoring system and timeline, go back, view the presentation, and then it'll give you all that details. If I could ask for 2 action items, again, timing is very important here. So I would recommend to reach out. The email address is bead@winncom.com, and let's set up a one-on-one call where we can help understand what you're doing and then build out that plan for to maximize your success. And the bottom link is the link to that BEAD website. So again, you put in your username, which can be your email address and your password. It takes a couple, maybe an hour or two for an approval process. But again, you get access to all that information. So I know we went a little bit long on this one, so we'll open it up to quick questions. Dawn, were you able to pull anything out?
Sure, I have 3 questions if you'd like to tackle them. The
Sure.
first one is, do you have any insights into which states are likely to have their initial proposal volume 2 approved by NTIA next?
Yeah, that is a great question. What I would give to have the ability to accurately predict which state gets its volume 2 approved next. In conversation with, so the short answer is no. But in conversation with state broadband offices, something I've been really surprised by is the fact that state broadband offices themselves feel like they don't have a good sense of when their own volume 2 initial proposal will be approved by the NTIA. It seems like the review process is a little bit of a black box for the states in terms of they'll receive communication from the NTIA. They will make recommended edits or changes in response to the NTIA, and then they will send those items back to the NTIA for review and approval, and they kind of won't hear anything for a couple of weeks or a month. So unfortunately, no, I cannot tell who is going to be approved next, but hopefully, all 56 states, territories, and Washington, D.C. will indeed have their Volume 2s approved by November of this year.
You answered that a lot more eloquently than I was. I was going to say I have a magic 8-ball. I can shake it and guess. But I like your answer much better.
Well, sticking with Volume 2, our next question, is it necessary for a state to have its initial proposal Volume 2 approved in order to begin the pre-application and pre-qualification process?
Great question. So no, a state does not have to have its Volume 2 approved to have or commence its pre-application or pre-qualification process. A great example of this is the state of Arkansas, which has not yet had its BEAD Volume 2 approved, but they just started their pre-qualification process at the start of last week. If you are thinking about applying to participate in the BEAD program of a given state, I would recommend that you check that state's broadband office website to see whether or not they've begun the pre-qualification process, if they have one. It's important to be on top of that because you do not want to miss the train on this because you missed an update or you weren't able to participate in the pre-qualification process.
Wonderful. And last question, which seems to be the best question on here. I'm not sure where to start. So how can Winncom and Tarana help me?
I can take that one.
Absolutely.
And that is a good question and a variable one. So I think it starts with the one-on-one session. Again, the best way of doing that is through email, bead@winncom.com. We'll reach out, we'll set up a call. Traditionally, these go for about an hour. On that call, we'll talk about things like offense and defensive. So from a defensive, did you already do a planned service challenge? What are those results? If it's a state other than the ones we spoke about that still have a planned service or rebuttal or reunification process still on the books, we can help you with that process. We can help walk through cost quest if that's a question. But ultimately, either defensively or offensively, we can help create the trajectory. And then leveraging programs like I mentioned with that QGIS, it gives strategic targets. So if you're looking at 1 county or 2 or 4 or 10, we can build out these detailed maps that give us where the best targets areas are, and then we can leverage that through our advanced program, either with grant writing or design assistance, to come up with what are the best technologies based on this particular area's demographic. So again, a long-winded answer, but I think it all starts with a conversation to figure out your unique needs and how we can best assist you. Gabriel, do you want to add on to that?
I couldn't have said it better myself. The Winncom folks really know what they're doing. They are a fantastic repository of information and getting started. For the folks who have interacted with Tarana Wireless before, if you have questions related to BEAD, reach out to your Tarana sales contact, and they will be happy to run your request up the chain. We can figure out if there's opportunity from the Tarana side of things to help you out directly.
Excellent.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate this. Was a great webinar. As a quick reminder to everyone, we will be sending out an email shortly with all the information you just learned. So please keep an eye out for that. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day. And as always, thank you for joining.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, Gabriel.
Yep. Thank you, folks.